Good morning, everyone. It's 9:35. I'm Michael Stein from Harvard Law School, and I'm honored and delighted to moderate this Panel B session on employment, an area that I've been studying for 30 years or so. Those of you who know me, and I notice many old friends and new friends among the participants over these last 2 days, know that it's probably the only area that I'm not all bouncy and cheerful about when it comes to disability law and policy, because I've been studying it for 30 years and we have various good practices we can highlight. But I've yet to see a single country with an acceptable relative disability employment rate. I've yet to see a single country with a coherent and efficient disability employment policy, meaning how do we get kids into school, and then how do we get young adults from school into work, or older adults into work. And so it's an area in which we are all grasping and in which we are all developing nations when it comes to disability, including the one that I'm speaking from, the US, where the employment rate has been a failure and an abject horror for at least 70 years that it's been monitored. But we're looking forward to a robust and interesting panel. We're going to have 3 papers, and each paper will have 15 minutes to be presented, following which we'll look through the Q&A and chat box and see what kind of dialogue we can initiate with these very fine speakers. Our first paper will be by Matthew Rutledge. It's a paper that he authored along with 2 others. It will be on how does contingent work affect SSDI benefits. The second will be by Michael Palmer, along with a co-author, on disability employment over the life cycle. And the third by Xuehui Li will be suitable for massage, cultural prejudice in the employment policy for the blind and multiple employment movement in China. And so let's begin with you, Matthew. If you could share your slides and or presentation with us, please kick us off.
Okay. Everybody can see my slides, right?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. So this work is joint with Alice Zulkarnain in the Netherlands and Sara Ellen King, who's now at USC. This work is looking at contingent work and how it affects SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance benefits. Now, what do I mean by contingent work? Well, contingent work can encompass lots of different arrangements. I think the easiest way to think of it is to think about what it doesn't include. So the kind of traditional employment that we're used to, sort of our grandfather's employment of working at a place for a reasonably decent amount of time, not necessarily decades, but certainly more of a permanent arrangement. Having employer benefits, working at the place that's actually employing you. So that's in contrast to some of the gig economy work that we've especially seen on the rise over the COVID recession. You know, the TaskRabbits and the DoorDashes and the shopping services that you see around your grocery stores when you have to go there. Also independent contracting and freelancing and consulting, which I'm sure would be up Michael Stein's alley. Also contract firms, temp agencies, maybe even independent temping. Also on-call work or odd jobs. Depending on the research, although not included in our definition, are things like part-time work, self-employment, even seasonal work. We don't include that as part of contingent work. I think that's a little bit too broad a definition, but certainly could be part of the people who are feeling the precarity of not having a longer-term full-time arrangement. We're particularly interested in older workers, and I think a lot for older workers, one of the big issues is whether they're going to be able to complete their career the way they intended, especially health-wise. Social Security disability insurance is available for people who are not able to complete their career the way that they would want to because of health reasons. And so we'd be interested to see whether these contingent workers, people who are going to be in these kinds of jobs that I just mentioned, would be more likely to use public programs that are designed to get people out of the workforce a little earlier than Social Security or any other retirement program would. So we're interested, are these workers more likely to apply to SSDI? And or on the other hand, do the fact that they're less likely to be eligible for it because they are working a lot off the books, or the fact that the benefits they would get out of the program are smaller, or the fact that they are losing out on some of the information sources about disability that more traditional employees would get, reduce their use of SSDI. So as I mentioned, this work is joint with Alice Zulkarnain from CPP Netherlands and Sara Ellen King, who is at Caesar at USC. What we're looking at is workers who are ages 50 to 64. We're using the health and retirement study. That's, I work for the Center of Retirement Research. Of course, that's going to be part of what we do. And what we find is that workers who spend at least some time in a contingent job, somewhere between ages 50 and 64, are less likely to apply to SSDI. That's not necessarily an obvious outcome. As I'll talk about in a second, the theory suggests that it could go either way. They're also less likely to actually be awarded those SSDI benefits. They're less likely, the benefits they would get out of that program are smaller because of a record of having earned less over the course of their career. And they're less likely to even be eligible to apply in the first place, to be SSDI insured, to have put in the necessary work experience to actually be able to get benefits. What's interesting is that the contingent workers that we're looking at are actually more likely to have the kind of health problems, work limitations, at least self-reported work limitations, that would often get these workers into the SSDI program. And so what this suggests is that even unhealthy contingent workers are less likely to have the SSDI activity that unhealthy workers in traditional arrangements would likely have. So let me go through some of the theory about why we would, what the relationship we would expect between contingent work and SSDI applications. And I think the more obvious situation, although as I'll talk about in a second, it could go the other way, the more obvious relationship is that contingent workers are less likely to apply to SSDI. So the system itself, the SSDI system, requires people to have put in a certain amount of total experience, usually about 10 years, and a certain amount of recent experience, usually 5 out of the last 10. And because of the spotty work history of a lot of people that work in contingent work, they may not be able to satisfy those requirements. So they may not be covered or insured for SSDI purposes. So imagine not having insurance basically through the government because you're not eligible. Um, the benefits they would get out of the system may also be really low as a result of having lower earnings over the course of their career. SSDI benefits are calculated much like retirement benefits from Social Security, where it's a function of the average earnings you've earned over the course of your career. And so those benefits just may be too little to live on. So those people may not, the people who, even unhealthy contingent workers, may decide that it's not worth trying to get into the program. Also, SSDI applications are evaluated by human evaluators who may look at somebody's work history and say, wow, you've been pretty creative in your ability to find work. So, maybe the fact that they're finding these other arrangements suggests that the evaluators would see them as capable of doing other jobs. Also, just the fact that by definition, these contingent workers are lacking the kind of traditional employment arrangement, or really the traditional employer that a lot of us have been able to benefit from, may mean that they are less likely to apply for the program. On the one hand, and one reason is that employers or the union, when they see a worker leaving for health reasons, may provide them information about how to apply to SSDI. And contingent workers, because they don't have that solid relationship with an employer or are not part of a union, would miss out on some of that information. It may be also that a lot of these workers have been through the private disability system. They've had short-term or long-term disability benefits that they got through their employer. And those programs often require people to apply to SSDI. These workers often spend a little bit more time, or at least some more time, without health insurance. Often these contingent jobs do not have health benefits. And that's actually one way we've done this research before, is to look at people who don't have retirement and health benefits. If you don't have health benefits, you may lack access to regular access to a doctor, and that doctor may be the one who's providing the information about applying to SSDI. Furthermore, contingent workers may not want to risk the current arrangement that they've been able to make, that contingent work arrangement. It may be that they realize that if they spend a bunch of time applying for SSDI, but they're ultimately denied, they're going to have to get back into the workforce somehow. It might have been really hard to make the contingent arrangement that they did, and so they don't want to put that at risk. Or they really like the arrangement. They like the fact that it's flexible. It's allows them some autonomy and maybe provides a bit more work-life balance. Not all of these contingent work arrangements are involuntary. That's especially true for the older people that we're looking at in this study. So maybe they just kind of like the way things are going. They don't feel the push to leave the SSDI, leave workforce for SSDI. Also, once they're in the SSDI system, once they're receiving those benefits, it could be that contingent work actually provides a nice substitute for SSDI benefits. So that might be especially the case for people who have episodic health conditions, things like depression and anxiety, or back problems, where sometimes you're totally capable of working, and so you can go and make that arrangement to be an independent contractor. Or there'll be other times in which you can't work at all. You can barely get out of bed, in which case, if you'd had a traditional job, you might have lost that. Whereas a contingent work, you have a little bit more flexibility to work when you can and when you want to. Or maybe we might just be seeing a selected sample here. Maybe only the healthier and savvier workers form these contingent arrangements. On the other hand, contingent workers may be more likely to apply to SSDI just the fact that they'd be giving up less, they have a lower opportunity cost, means that they may be more likely to apply. For example, they have low pay, pretty little stability, not a whole lot of fringe benefits. And on the fringe benefit front, just getting into SSDI means they're connected to Medicare eventually after 2 years in the program. If their income is quite low, they might also qualify for SSI, which would get them Medicaid benefits right away. So that might be a draw into SSDI, make them more likely to apply. It may be that where workers' comp benefits or private disability may deter some people from applying to SSDI, that's not going to happen for contingent workers who wouldn't be eligible for those programs. So they would just go to SSDI instead. And it may just be harder to hold down contingent jobs when you're unhealthy, in which case, when you have some sort of health episode, there's no employer around to make accommodations to try to keep you. And so therefore you get shunted into the SSDI system. And you're often not protected from discrimination against your health problems. So that means more likely that you would have trouble keeping a job and you would be pushed into SSDI. So what we do is we look at the health and retirement study, which is a big household survey of people who are over age 50. We focus on the 50 to 64 population. What we get from the HRS is information on their experience with contingent work, which I'll define in a second, their health status, and then a bunch of control variables, basically, including their spouse's work status and their household income, excluding their own earnings and net worth, health insurance, demographic stuff. We also attach the HRS to administrative records on their application and award records for SSDI, as well as the benefits that they might get to see whether they're actually in the SSDI system at some point. We also link the HRS to the summary earnings file, which provides us a way to estimate whether somebody is eligible to apply based on the number of covered quarters that they've accumulated over the course of their career, basically their work experience. As well as calculating the benefit they would get if they do apply for SSDI, using the same sort of terminology that Social Security uses for their retirement benefits. There's no direct definition of contingent work in the HRS, and we have several, Allison and I, and actually Sarah has been involved too, in a number of studies in which we've been trying different ways to define contingent work. And in other studies, we've looked at just not having employer health and retirement benefits. In this case, what we do is look at several different traits that sort of stack together, I think, form the pattern of contingent work. One is recent job instability. In the waves around the current one that we're looking at, and HRS samples you every 2 years, we see whether you've had very short job tenures or whether you've had some gaps in between employers or just in non-employment over the course of those periods. We've also looked to see whether you were self-employed with no other employees, which I think to us implies that you might be an independent contractor, or that you might be paid in some sort of unusual arrangement, like on a daily basis or piecemeal or by commission, even though not all of those jobs might apply to being something like contingent work. I think a lot of them would. And so we're getting a sense of who might be a contingent worker as best we can from the HRS. We look at HRS respondents who are 50 to 64. We start with people who have never applied to SSDI or SSI, and then we look to see whether they do subsequently. We start when they're first observed working within that window, and that they're actually eligible to apply to SSDI. So we rule out the people who are not eligible. Then we end at when it's a hazard model. So we end at when they apply to SSDI or when they drop out of the data or we just run out of data for them. That also includes getting to age 65 or trading out of the sample or applying for Social Security retirement benefits, even though you can apply for both. Most people, when they're in the retirement system, don't bother to apply to disability. We also do a separate analysis for any workers who have a chronic condition, a work limitation or ADL limitation, an activities of daily living limitation. So we're trying to get at a separate analysis for whether unhealthy workers are especially affected. We're going to be looking at applying to SSDI, getting awarded benefits, the benefits that they might get out of the system, and whether they're actually eligible to do so. Our key independent variable is that contingent work definition, which is just ever having a contingent job at these ages, 50 to 64, versus never having a contingent job. What we see is that contingent workers have lower application and award rates, but they're actually less healthy despite that. So we can see in the first column, they're less likely to, the first row, they're less likely to be eligible to apply. The difference is in that last column that you can see that the negative numbers here means that the ever contingent people are less than the never contingent. Their application and award rates are somewhat smaller. Their benefits are quite a bit smaller, but they're actually a little bit, they're quite a bit more likely to have a self-reported work limitation, about the same or maybe even a little less likely to have an ADL limitation or a chronic illness. When we look at our regression analysis, what we find is for the full sample, that SSDI applications are about 5.7 percentage points lower for people who have spent some time in contingent work. Sorry, that's a coverage rate. Sorry, they're 5.7 percentage points less likely to be eligible for SSDI. They're about 2.2 percentage points less likely to apply, and about 2.4 percentage points less likely to actually be awarded those benefits. That might be the result of the fact that the benefits that they would get are smaller. The average earnings, that's the fourth column there, the fourth row there, implies that they've earned less over the course of their career, and that results in a smaller benefit in that last row. Even among the unhealthy workers, they're less likely, the contingent workers are less likely than unhealthy never contingent workers, the traditional employees, to be eligible to apply. They're somewhat less likely to apply and to be awarded benefits, and the benefits that they would get are quite a bit smaller. So what we see here is that contingent workers, even those with health issues, are less likely to apply to and be awarded SSDI benefits. And we think that's partly because of the job instability and low pay may actually encourage their benefits, but I think a lot of other factors point in the other direction. The fact that they would get less out of the system, maybe not enough to live on, means that they're not going to bother to apply to SSDI. Or the fact that because of inconsistent earnings reporting, they may just be less likely to even be able to consider applying to disability. They may also get less information from their employers and doctors as a result of having less stable work and less stable health insurance coverage. What we think that matters here is that we may be seeing some growth in contingent work, especially, anecdotally. I think we see a lot of that during the pandemic recession. That may not necessarily result in more SSDI activity, which I think is good news for the program, but bad news for the people who may be helped by SSDI. That a lot of these folks are unhealthy and they're missing out on the kind of help they can get from SSDI. During our COVID recession, we may even see fewer SSDI awardees and maybe fewer applications. We might see that there are more applications just because we see some economic weakness, but that fewer people are actually ending up on the program, which is good news for government budgets. They're often quite strained right now, but the workers struggling with their health really aren't going to get the help that they need, especially right now. And considering that COVID may be leading to more long-term health problems, that's especially bad news. We would really want those folks to be getting into this program. So I look forward to your comments and to hearing the other presentations, and thanks a lot.
Matthew, thank you so much. For those who are not familiar with the U.S. background on it, there's a lot of literature, both from NBER type, plus a lot of political statements about how workers continue to migrate onto disability-based social benefits, both from a sympathetic point of view, for example, elders who lost their pensions after 2008, and from a less than sympathetic view, as in welfare frauds or other allegations. And so what you're telling is actually a story about people who are hanging in to the workplace, maybe not even to their own benefits, right, and maybe not, to increase this sort of income that they ought to have. And so a very interesting and fascinating approach on it. We will have lots of time for questions later, but let's now move on to Michael Palmer. Michael, you need to unmute your microphone.
Oops, looks like I'm on the last slide. Can everyone see my presentation?
Yes. Our marvelous facilitators encourage us to speak slowly and be more easily translatable to our friends, including me.
Okay, so thank you, Michael, and thank you to Sophie Mitra and to the organisers of this symposium. It's really fantastic to be involved and I guess to see presentations from different perspectives, different disciplines, all addressing sort of similar issues around disability. So I think it's really inspiring for me and encouraging to see that everyone is on the same page and is working together to try and address some of these big issues. So today I'll be talking about disability and employment over the life cycle. This is a paper I'm working on with my colleague Dennis Petrie. He's at Monash University. I'm at the University of Western Australia here in Perth. So the question we sort of take up in this presentation is this question here is, if you acquire a disability at a young age, is that associated with better or worse employment outcomes over time? compared to if you developed a disability at older age. So, you know, we started looking into economic theory around this, and you know, the prediction is that younger people should invest more in their human capital because they have a longer time to recoup the benefits and the costs of their investment. It's also predicted that because human capital takes time to accumulate and rises with age, then the older the person is at onset, the more human capital will be destroyed. So the bigger the shock and the more costly it will be to recoup. Okay, so according to this sort of human capital framework, which is pretty dominant within economics, is that, you know, upon the onset of disability, sort of post-onset employment should be greater for people that are younger at onset. So that's one perspective and hypothesis. There's alternate hypotheses to this human capital characterization of disability in the labour market, and that's notably, you know, the fact that you know, people with disabilities suffer from employment discrimination. And there is some empirical work on this that suggests that discrimination caused by prejudice among employers may be a particular problem for workers with little experience, or those that are less skilled than others. So I think Walita spoke about this yesterday in her presentation. So this, you know, conversely suggests that you know, post-employment, that post-onset employment growth would actually be slower for younger people at onset. So a contrary position to the human capital model. So essentially, you know, in theory, you know, it's not really clear what the relationship would be. So, you know, as I was saying earlier, I mean, there's a massive literature on labour market disadvantage of people with disabilities, much bigger than I originally thought before I embarked on this paper. But quite surprisingly, very few studies have actually looked into this question, which seems to be a fairly pivotal question in terms of developing policies. And this is especially the case given the fact that we've got this phenomena of ageing populations throughout the world. So in the future, we're going to have more and more people with mature age onset of disability. So there is this sort of seminal paper in 2003 using the US panel study of income dynamics by Charles, some of you may be aware of, and he finds that older age onset of disability is associated with greater loss in expected earnings for the time of onset, and also a smaller recovery in earnings post-onset of disability. However, his sample is restricted to males, and also the disability information is quite limited in the survey. So he wasn't able to control for disability severity or the type of disability. So it's possible that, you know, people with older onset of disability may be more predisposed to sort of more severe disabilities or certain impairments that may limit their participation in the labour market. So these are a few things that we contribute to in this paper. So we investigate the dynamic effects of onset of disability on employment at different ages for the male as well as the female population. We use a panel longitudinal study from Australia called the Household Income and Labour Dynamics Survey, otherwise known as the HILDA. The advantage of this survey is it has quite detailed disability information that's been collected annually since the inception of the survey in 2001. So we're currently into the 18th wave. It also has fairly detailed information on the severity of disability and also underlying health conditions and impairments. But importantly, I think for this study is that it has a special module on labour market discrimination. So we're able to examine these alternate hypotheses around what might be driving behaviours of people with disabilities in the Okay, so I'll just briefly speak about the data. So it's mentioned a longitudinal study from 2001 to 2018. So we use 18 waves. The original panel was around 17,000 individuals, so much smaller size panel compared to the PSID studies that we often see in the US. We restrict the sample to people of working age, which we define as 20 to 64. And I know many of us in the audience are not comfortable with that term working age, so apologies. The definition of disability is as follows. So the question is, do you have a long-term health condition, impairments, or disabilities such as these? So the respondents are given a long list of impairments and health conditions that restricts you in everyday activities and has lasted or is likely to last for 6 months or more. Respondents that answered positively to this were then asked, does your condition limit the amount or type of work that you can do? So we define people with disabilities as those that have work-limiting disabilities, so that answered yes to the above two questions. And these people represent about 75% of the respondents that reported a disabling condition. So we're picking up the majority of respondents here. Okay, so this is looking at the trends in disability prevalence by gender in Australia, and you can see it's quite interesting that it tends to be slightly higher prevalence of disability reported amongst females aged 20 to 64 years, so hovering around 15 to 16%, whereas males over time are sort of around 11, 12 to 15%. So fairly similar trends, but we see a divergence in around 2006 for some reason. As we all know, there's a really strong age gradient with disability, so we can see this very clearly here. There doesn't seem to be much of a story in terms of gender. Slightly stronger age gradient for females. Okay, so the definition of employment is fairly standard, so it's based upon an ILO definition of whether people were working in paid employment in the last 7 days. So we therefore define non-employment to include those that are in unemployment or not in the labour force. So this is looking at the, I guess, the descriptive relationship between disability and employment over the life cycle. So if we look at the solid lines here, which represent the disabled population, so males in the black solid line, females in the solid grey line, and the dashed lines, the respective colours represent their counterparts without disabilities. So I think there's a couple of points to make here. There's a lot going on in the graph, but I think the first point is that as Michael was mentioning earlier, that that the gaps in employment are massive for both men and women. And what's interesting is they seem to widen over age as people get older, which suggests that there may be sort of more adverse effects of unemployment, of disability as one ages. The other interesting point to note is that those gaps seem to be higher for men on average over the life cycle, which may suggest that the impact of disability on employment is worse for men. There's another interesting thing that we can see here is that the widening of the gap by age is happening much earlier for females and also much sharper, which suggests that the trajectories of employment for men and women with disabilities are very different, which sort of justifies our examination of both sexes. So the whole point of this paper is actually to examine the impact of disability onset on employment. And this is problematic because very few surveys collect information of when the disabling condition first arose. The HILDA does collect this information, but it's only for the top-up sample, so the new people coming into the sample. So we sort of follow, however, I think one sort of fairly strong advantage of the HILDA is that it records whether the disabling condition was first developed in the preceding year before the interview. So we're actually able to better hone in the onset date, the period of onset, which I think is a big advantage over previous studies, particularly the study by Charles, which uses the PSID. So we define onset as the first reporting of disability in the survey, which precedes the reporting of no disability in the previous period for conditions that were first developed after the date of the last interview. So this restriction actually removes close to 2/3 of the onset sample. which suggests that, you know, constructed measures of onset suffer from fairly significant measurement bias. Okay, so I won't go into this too much, but basically what we do is we estimate a dynamic fixed effects model. So we control for sort of fixed factors, fixed characteristics of individuals over time. So therefore our estimates are looking at within person changes. So we look at the change in employment according to the age of onset for 3 different groups of onset ages according to the period from onset. So we look at 2 years before onset and up to 5 or more years post onset. Okay, so becomes a bit clearer here in the images. If we look at males here, so 0 represents the year of onset, and all these lines, different coloured lines, represent the different age intervals of onset. So we define 3 groups. You know, people that have onset of disability, it's between the years of 20 and 34, 35 to 49, and 50 to 64. We can see for males that there's a big shock. So upon onset, you know, the probability of being employed reduces quite significantly in that year of onset, which is denoted by 0 here. And then we can see for all age group, there's a recovery, I guess, that we see over time. So the effect is greatest in the year of onset, as we would expect, but over time, you know, there's somewhat of a recovery. It's still pretty bad though for all ages. But if we look at females, the pattern is quite different here. So what's interesting to see is that sort of mature age, sort of older women that have onset in their 50s to early 60s are not experiencing any of this sort of recovery. So what we're seeing is that they're actually getting progressively worse over time. Okay, so we press ahead now and further to Charles's. We sort of build on the earlier study by Charles, and we disaggregate onset according to the severity of the onset in the year of onset. So there was a subsequent question asking people to scale their degree of severity of work limiting disability on a scale from 0 to 10. So we defined severe people to have a scale from 5 to 10, and then non-severe to be from 0 to 4. So as we would expect, we can see that the shocks for employment are much greater for the severe, people with severe onset. We see, and so we see this sort of very similar pattern that we saw earlier for the baseline results for the severe group. Whereas for men with sort of non-severe disabilities, we're not seeing such a large effect on onset, and we're seeing a fairly you know, stable recovery, such that, you know, by year 5, a lot of these coefficients are actually, you can see from the confidence intervals there that they're actually crossing that 0 line there, which suggests that those employment levels are actually returning to expected levels 3 or more years prior to onset. Okay, so looking at females here, the interesting thing to note again is this story with elder women, elderly age women, 50 to 64, and that pattern is consistent for severe and non-severe. Okay, we also disaggregate results according to impairment type. So there was a long list of impairments that respondents were given. There was one interesting question where respondents were asked whether their impairment was a physical impairment and restricted their ability to undertake physical work. So we defined this sort of binary variable for whether people had a physical impairment being 1 or 0. So all other impairments were those that were not physical. We can see here that there's fairly similar patterns for non-physical and physical for male. And again, we can see that the same sort of pattern is seen for females, where again, it's sort of older females that, thanks Michael, it's older females that are doing worse, those that have onset of both physical and non-physical disabilities. Okay, so getting to now the second part of the paper, which is looking at this idea of discrimination. So the Hilda survey included this special module in 4 waves, 2008, 2010, 14, and 18. And it was restricted to people that were applying for a job with a new employer in the past 2 years. And they were asked the following question: thinking of the jobs you have applied for in the past 2 years, do you think you were ever unsuccessful because the employer discriminated against you? Okay, so we graph the proportion of respondents responding favorably to this question, over the life cycle for both people with and without disabilities and by gender. And we can see here that the gaps seem to be bigger for people that are younger age, okay? So we can see here that the people with disabilities, males and females, are recording higher levels of discrimination in the job seeking process. Like people without disabilities, this is increasing with age. However, the gap between people without disabilities is actually bigger for males and females, particularly males in the earlier ages. So it suggests there may be some sort of systematic relationship between disability and discrimination by age. So we look at this in more detail using a regression analysis. So we control for individual characteristics and also the state of residence and the year. And we can see here that there does appear to be, so I should explain that the equation here has discrimination on the left-hand side, so that's the outcome variable. And these interaction terms tell us the difference in perceived discrimination between disabled and non-disabled in their respective age categories. And we can see that those coefficients are all positive for all age groups. And some of those coefficients are significant, but when we ran an F-test for whether there's any difference between those coefficients by age, we don't find any significant difference, which suggests that yes, there is appears to be discrimination against disability, but it doesn't seem to be systematically related to age or differ by age category. Okay, so the takeaway points are that there's a significant proportion of the working population in Australia that has a work-limiting disability. This has obviously big implications for the labour market and the welfare system. Adverse effects of disability on employment vary considerably by age of onset and by gender. Specifically, older women rather than men are hardest hit by disability onset in terms of their employment. The result is consistent across severity and type of disability. We find evidence of discrimination among employers against the disabled. However, there's little evidence to suggest that it differs by age. Future work will explore alternate hypotheses, particularly relating to the availability of retirement and disability benefits. So very interested in Matthew's talk previously. And just the final point, I think, is that we need to explore policy options to keep older women who require a disability engaged in the workforce. So I'll leave it at that and welcome any questions.
Thank you. We're going to have our third speaker, and then we'll circle back to you with questions so we make sure we get all the work out. And Xuehui, if you have a panel slide away, please share screen and put your PowerPoints on. That was a very interesting presentation. I was surprised before the panel you told me this was your first dip into disability policy analysis. That's shocking. You've done all this. And of course, the interesting parts are that one of the typical stories we tell about disability law is that it most often benefits those who are already in the workplace and then encounter their disabilities, usually middle-aged women and up, and usually musculoskeletal injuries. And yet you're showing some very different differentials on age, gender, and severity of disability, which really puts up a nuanced and different look at it. So we'll come back with, we already have some questions queued up. And now we have our third speaker, please.
Hello. Hello,
Michael, I think you need to end sharing.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. Hello. Good morning and good evening, everyone. Because China, it's the midnight now. Today, yeah. Today I will talking about the cultural phenomenon in China suitable for massage. And
Xuehui, you need to put back your microphone, please.
okay, it's okay now.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. This today the presentation is the extension of our previous paper. We will publish the paper protection or restriction on the Journal of Visual Impairment and Blindness. And so this paper, we talked about the history, policy effectiveness, and efficiency from the law perspective, especially from the perspective of CIPD. And we at this paper, we pointed that at the preliminary stage of police practice, blind massage as a profession indeed promoted employment of person with visual impairment. As the system of blind massage gradually perfected, it has restricted person with visual impairment to choose their career freely. So this paper, I will discuss the social and cultural consequences of this policy in China. And before we talking about the cultural and the social construction of this blind massage policy, I think we need to make some introduction of blind massage in China. So it's a background to understand we were talking about the consequence of the cultural consequence. And in China, there are two kinds of blind massage, healthcare massage and medical massage. Because these two kinds of massage, we separated these two kinds. It's important to understand the history of blind massage in China. The healthcare massage is practiced in commercial organizations to enhance one's bodily relaxation and physical wellness. Blind medical massage are considered medical personnel and shall have ethical and professional qualification. And this is the brief history of blind massage, the development of blind massage in China mainland. And we give a very brief history in this paper because we give a comprehensive description in previous paper. And before the new China in 1949, very few records about blind massage in China. And I just find one record in the literature because it's a very famous novel named The Plum in the Golden West, or Jin Ping Mei in Chinese. And when the establishment of the new China from 1949 to 1985, it's the stage of building and the autonomous development stage. And there is a very important year in 1955, because this is the starting year of the blind massage practice in China. And as you know, it's in this about more than 30 years in the new China, especially in the 10 years of cultural revolution, and the government have no more money to develop the blind massage, and the new development stage is from 1985, because there is a very important conference held by Chinese Ministry of Civil Affairs. This year, it's the starting point of blind massage as national policy, because this conference is opened up a new era of massage for the blind. And it summarized the progress and the status of blind massage in China, and outlined plans and strategies for future development. And from then on, blind massage has become a profession and the government's efforts at the national policy level. And from 2011 up till now, I named this stage as sweeping policy, because the medical blind massage and the healthcare blind massage developed two different orientation. And this is a figure of training for the blind massage from 1996 to 2019. As we see from this figure, we can see the number of blind massage trained. The healthcare blind massage is more than medical blind massage in every year. And in these years, the government pay attention to medical blind massage again, and they pay more and more money than on medical blind massage than on healthcare blind massage. And this table, we can see the government established the profession qualification system for medical massage workers from 28, and every year about there are about 10,000 about 1,000 persons get the qualifications for medical massage. So there are some important facts about the blind massage in China mainland. The first one is blind massage is a semi-reserved employment. At the concluding observations in 2012, the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disability mentioned blind massage as a part of court system in China. This observation see blind massage in China is a reserved employment, but our research shows that the blind massage is a semi-reserved employment in China, because it is not a reserved employment like Japan or Taiwan or South Korea in period years about 10 years ago. This means that non-visually impairment people can also do massage, while only blind massage are allowed to work in blind massage parlors. So it's a semi-reserved employment. And the second fact is that the blind is historic. Massage is historic, but not blind massage, because there are. It's a common statement that the blind massage is a historic practice in China, but from my research, blind massage is very very where is there not so much records in the history of blind massage in China. I just find one record from this very famous novel, and so during the late Qing dynasty and the Republic of China, there were many schools for the blind founded by foreign missionaries. And according to my literature review, very few of them offered massage or acupressure course. In short, before the founding of New China, literature showed that massage for blind people was very rare and did not become a regular part of professional training. The third fact is that China has established an intensive network of massage skill training, skill identification and employment placement for the blind, and special official institution was established all over the world, all over the China, from the central government to provincial government. And the last one is in the same way as the network for the promotion and of blind massage profession. It is a limitation of the educational system for the blind, including segregated education in basic education and a major choice in higher education, because in higher education, the blind just have very few choice to choose their universities. Maybe about 3 universities they only to choose, and the major of in these universities there are just 2 majors. One is music and another is massage. So I will talk about this police practice. I will from the perspective of cultural construction and the cultural representations in society. And so this is very common statements in the law of social policy documents, and even academic researchers like this, blind people, this paragraph. And because the reason of the common reason or basis for police is this. Their attention is relatively concentrated, less easily disturbed by other things, and most have a strong patience. Massage work can promote the hypersensitivity of the blind, avoid the short mobility of the blind. So this is the reasons and the basic for the policy. The government, this is very common in the law and the policy statement. So I think this police practice fall into the logic of evolution and the path dependence, because the much success of the blind massage practice, the lower or the more restriction for the blind to choose their job freely. And as another representation, in the society, except for the law or police document. This literature is and some other film is also the main cultural representation, such as very famous novel Twina. The author is Bifei Yu. This
Xuehui, you need to wrap up, please.
okay.
Thank you.
And this book received wide praise and won the Edith Modern Literature Prize in 2011. And the committee of the judgments give a very higher judgment to this novel. And this novel was adopted to film, TV series, and drama. As we all know, this is a very famous film, Blind Massage, directed by Lou Ye, and when very more when more numerous awards from such as Berlin International Film Festival and the Golden Horse Film Festival. But I think this film is it is very successful, but it's also a failure in the development of China, especially for the blind. Because I think there is no reflection talking about if the blind love their profession or they have the right to choose their job freely, and so the book and the film is far away from the reality of the dilemma faced by the blind. So I think this film expressed the prejudice of blind massage, because if you mention the blind, it's very easy to think the massage. So the blind plus massage is a very common usage in our communication. So in these years, I think the multiple employment movement in China is very emergency of this movement, because the young generation or the new generation of blind meet the CRPD era. So they challenged the common statement just we mentioned, and this because this is maybe they are suitable for massage. It's group characters maybe, but this is not equal to individual rights. And at the same time, there is some cultural representations to reflect the police practice, such as a documentary Blind Choice in 2015. In Chinese, it means blind not for massage. And at this same time, some social organizations provide social service to remove barriers to choose work freely, such as the education, because from 2018, the government release the law to allow the blind to when the participant in national examination, they will give the blind reasonable accommodation.
Okay, thank you very much, Xuehui. I'm
Okay.
sorry to interrupt you, but I did alert you when you were coming up to your time limit, and then you went over it by 7 minutes. It's a wonderful and rich talk. We're thankful for you for sharing it to us. It gives us more of a context of blind massage in China as opposed to its neighbors and the cultural context. We are at the end of the session, but I would alert each of the speakers that in the Q&A box on your screen, each one of you has a question, and it would be very gracious of you if you might spend a moment to answer it so that the audience could receive their responses. I thank each of you for contributing this morning. We're now at the end of our allotted time, and we will be moving on to the keynote by Dr. Professor Jody Hyman in just a moment. So thank you all very much.